Evening, everybody, and welcome to our second and last Interaction Design Foundation meetup for this year. This evening we'd like to start off by just have a look at the link in the chat. It will take you to our Miro board. If you could just add a comment on our tree over here to say what your name is, where your location is, and what learning goals you currently have, as well as your current role. This will help us to curate the content going forward to focus on topics that are related to your specific learning goals. Yeah, so if you've got some time, please just have a look at that link before the end of the session. So we'd like to, we'll just have this, we'll cover our Q&A, our question and answer session with our speaker, Michael Brown. Thereafter, we'll focus on, we'll open up the discussion for the rest of the community, where you can then ask your questions either via chat or directly to the speaker. If anybody hasn't attended any of our Interaction Design Foundation meetups before, let me just give you a bit of context. So the IDF started in 2002 in Denmark, and the core focus or the mission was to create Ivy League level education for everyone and ensure that everybody has access to it. So by ensuring that it was at a much lower cost, thus removing the barriers for everybody. Currently, IDF runs in more than 400 groups globally and in 84 countries. It's also the world's leading online design school with different, which help everybody learn in different ways, from UX bootcamps to masterclasses and the online courses which you might be familiar with. There are also more than 150 experts who are creating the online material, and more than 94,000 graduates and counting. From a South African perspective, our Johannesburg group is #1 in South Africa, #2 in Africa, and #24 globally. The certification that you get when studying on the IDF is recognized by experts at leading companies from Philips, Accenture, Adobe, to name a few. And some of the resources are created by well-known thought leaders such as Don Norman. So let's hand the floor over to our speaker this evening, Michael Brown, who has more than 20 years experience in global strategy, and some of his achievements include business strategy and innovation, digital transformation, customer experience, and employee experience and culture. He specializes in design thinking, user research, service design, experimentation, and storytelling, as well as driving innovation, transformation, and loyalty for products and services, incorporation of disruptive technologies to turn ideas into reality, and attracting the right talent, culture, and thought leadership. So without further ado, here's our speaker, Michael Brown.
Hi, pleasure to be here. Honestly, I was hoping to go to South Africa for a conference. It sounded great when we talked about this, but because of COVID, I'm stuck in snowy Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the USA. So hopefully you're all having fun down there.
So before we get into the serious design questions, we'd like to know what did you actually want to be when you grew up?
You know, when I was young, I grew up next to a Navy base, and in the U.S., the Navy is kind of where they have the cool jets, like the movie Top Gun with Tom Cruise. And I always wanted to be a test pilot. I would sit outside and listen to planes fly over. It could tell you exactly what type of plane it was. I spent every summer at the base, you know, cleaning planes and washing planes, and dreamed of someday being Tom Cruise in Top Gun. Well, I went to school, and then I had to take this stupid class called calculus, and I hated calculus. And while I liked math, I hated calculus. And I just couldn't get past the mathematical requirements to become a pilot, because it required aerospace engineering, or at least that's what I thought. And so I chose to shift. But growing up, it was always like, I just wanted to be a pilot. I wanted that freedom to kind of explore the world. And then I see here you're saying, but how did I shift? So again, I had to take the calculus, didn't want to take it. So I switched to computer science. It had that same level of freedom to kind of explore and build things and do things differently. But I quickly kind of realized something as I was going through this. And so I had grown up, my mother and father were heads of sales and marketing at a company called Sun Microsystems. And I was studying computer science in the US at one of the top computer science schools. And it was in that first year that I switched out of aerospace that I realized that my parents could sell anything and I could build anything, but if people couldn't use it, it was worthless. And I came to that realization because I kept breaking all my friends' software that they would write for class. And so I approached a professor and saying, why can't you teach us how to make these things usable? So we sat down and we actually created our own major called Human Computer Interaction. This was like back in 1997. It wasn't even really a field. We had like 2 books. I remember we had HCI towards the year 2000, which was a collection of ACM articles. And then you had Don Norman's book, which was originally called The Psychology of Everyday Things, and then later became The Design of Everyday Things. And that's all we had. And so, I believed that the future was going to be based on not just delivering more crap that people couldn't use, but quite frankly, delivering things that people would use, and that was of value. And so I began this journey 24-ish years ago.
That's amazing. I think a lot of people probably don't even know the origins of HCI. One of the other things that I wanted to know is when we look at your profile, it mentions not only custom experience and employee experience or user experience, but also brand experience. For people who are not familiar with this, can you help us understand the differences?
Well, the way I think of it is it's quite frankly the evolution of what I started 24 years ago. So it's a great segue. Thanks for setting it up that way. So originally, when I started in this field, we were all UI designers. And what that meant was we were given requirements by a product team, and it was our job to design the elements and to put them into a spec document, traditionally called a PRD. Engineers would take these documents, they would build out what we had handed them, and 6 to 9 months later, we would look at it and say, did it match? And if it didn't match, it would go into the next 6-12-month release and hopefully be there. Well, we evolved and we started to think about, like, how are people actually interacting and using these tools? How are they using this, as I call it, the crap that we create, these experiences? Like, what is their flow? What is their path? How do they from sign in to success? And so that became user experience, which was great for me because I was able to leverage kind of where my background had been. And to take a step back, when I formed my major was based on computer science and psychology. It had never really even taken in graphic arts. And so user experience became this really natural evolution that I embraced because it was about how do people experience technology and how do they go through it? How does a user experience it? Well, what's happened is user experiences and customers and the way they interact with our product becomes the differentiator, right? No longer can companies expect to grow customer base and retain customers based on product alone. It's just too cheap to make products and it's too easy to launch. And so companies are now trying to focus on, like, how do we actually drive a great customer experience, which while user experience focuses kind of on if you think about a vertical, this goes across a business unit and it's specific to a product, customer experience is a horizontal, kind of like HR. It really looks at how do customers interact with our entire company across all the different business units. And so what we're seeing is that while UX really focused on, do you have a successful experience? Can you get from point A to B simply? Customer experience really focuses on the satisfaction with a brand or with a company. Do customers embrace it? It starts with, and it's kind of a culmination of multiple skills, which is awesome. And the UX people of the future, if you're trying to get ahead of the curve, this is where you probably want to be professionally, because it's a combination of strategy, which is traditional business acumen. Where do we go? What's our opportunities? What's our growth? Product, which is where UX has sat, customer success and stories, and then finally, marketing and advertising of that success. So it's marketing, it's strategy, it's product, and it's operations success. And so that's CX. And quite frankly, where most people get stuck is the greatest customer experiences, because we all can design customer experiences, are only empowered by employee experiences. So those who design CX are actually start by designing EX, the employee experience. So what are the tools that the employees are using? Let's simply put it this way. Let's say you were buying a baseball hat, right? You might think that you designed that online experience of buying a baseball hat, but imagine it never gets to you, or you get the wrong hat, or whatever the case is. If you don't get what you bought or you thought you bought, you have a horrible experience no matter how great that hat is. So in order to focus on CX, you think about that employee experience of maybe someone in the warehouse. How did they pick that hat out of a box and make sure it went into the right package? What does that look like? How do we find out the right pricing? How do we find out the right speculation? So CX is about EX. Now, what you said, which I think is the evolution, maybe 3 to 4 years down the road, we're going to see a lot of growth here, is what was called service design. Some are calling it BX, brand experience. And what we mean by brand experience is as we start to evolve to consider customer needs, we start to realize that our brand and our product just plays a small part in their total story, their total journey that they go through. But if we can make a meaningful have a meaningful contribution to that story, we'll actually retain loyalty with that customer. I explain this to my friends around the metaphor of ketchup. You may not have any loyalty to ketchup today, but let's say you meet your significant other and you go on your first date. Let's say it's a great steakhouse, and on the table, there's a bottle of Heinz ketchup. Okay. And let's say that ketchup, your significant other is using that on their steak and they're tapping it, and you have this great date, you end up getting married. What happens is subconsciously, because it was in this whole ecosystem of how do your brand fit into that story, you will maintain loyalty to that brand because it's presence in a story. So that's when we think about brand experience, we kind of take a step back to think about, like, what is the overarching story, the overarching ecosystem, and how do I play, rather than this kind of egocentric model, which is like, I'm the only thing that exists and I'm going to design the best ketchup bottle.
And when it comes to your approach to leading digital transformation, maybe you can tell us more about your AI consumer and enterprise initiatives.
Yeah, so, digital transformation has been really interesting for me. And the reason it's been interesting is it really depends, quite frankly, on who's leading that transformation, and what their maturity around that is. So whenever I'm talking to someone about digital transformation, I first want to assess, what are they thinking about? So sometimes at the lowest entry point of like the lowest level of maturity around digital transformation, an employer, a customer, a client, whoever is thinking about what's called a lift and shift. Maybe if we're thinking about banking, in the past we used to write physical checks, and now I want to do the same thing online. So they're trying to take this old analog approach or this non-cloud-based approach and literally replicate it digitally. They don't want to switch it up. They don't want to rethink the process. Just take something that was manual, make it digital. And that happens. The next level is what we call the persona-based, the simplification-based. So this customer is not already assumes that they're going to go over, and they start to ask questions about, well, how do we make it easier? If we're going to go digital, if we're going to move it online, if we're going to move it on the cloud, if we're going to move it wherever, what steps can we remove along that workflow? The third is the persona. And this is a customer or a client or employer who's talking about who's actually using it. They're going to approach you and say, I want to move this digital for this person and this person's needs. And in doing that, we want to simplify their tasks by moving it online. So they're at the third level of maturity. And the final one is the ecosystem, where they're starting to think about how this digital transformation might actually impact their entire organization, the ecosystem of their customer, or whatever. They're saying, well, we want to go digital to streamline XYZ with this number of employees, which will simplify the transition to the cloud. So when I approach a new client, a new customer, or an employer, the first thing I'm doing is evaluating where are they on that maturity curve. I then start to talk with them at one level above. So if they're talking about simplification, I start to ask about the personas. Who are your personas and what are they doing? Or if they're talking about personas, I start to talk about the ecosystem. Wherever they're at, I never go more than one step. Once we kind of figure out and we're starting to have that conversation, I start to talk about outcomes. Now, oftentimes in organizations that I've worked, when we think digital transformation, we tend to think in the old model of delivery, which is all about like our roadmap. We're going to create this annualized roadmap of what are we going to deliver this year in what order, and not really ever talking about the outcomes. It's all based on the assumption, if we deliver X, Y, Z, we will achieve A, B, C. As we think about digital transformation, we shift and we put that aside and we say, okay, rather than think about the roadmap, what are the outcomes we want to achieve from a customer-centric perspective? Customers need to be able to always be aware of the inventory we have in store. Our customers need to be able to pay for their products. We don't talk about how we're going to do it. We just talk about the outcome that they're going to have. And then as we get into a more agile kind of 2-week approach on this transformation, the team is innovating with methodologies that move towards that outcome. Oftentimes we find that as they think about simplification, artificial intelligence becomes a natural mechanism to deliver that. But that's traditionally how I approach leading digital transformation is number one, thinking about the maturity, elevating the conversation one step, and then shifting the conversation from roadmaps to outcomes.
And when it comes to managing this kind of change for employees, how would you, what examples do you have of how you've actually tried to attract and maintain the right kind of talent?
Well, number one, it's been my experience, and I may do things very, very differently. Many leaders rely on human resources or standard practices and procedures for how do they recruit and maintain talent. I think that's lazy, and I refuse to do that. So when it comes to recruiting talent, I do it myself. I work within my HR team and their guidelines, but I know who I'm trying to hire and I know what I'm trying to look for, and I reach out to people personally, right? So if I'm looking to have someone join my team as a direct report, I will write them personally. And I ask all of my leaders to do the exact same thing. We structure our interview process based on behaviors, not portfolio. The portfolio gets you in the door, but we're actually looking to see how do you handle working scenarios, because oftentimes someone might come in and they might do great on the interview, but quite frankly, struggle to fit in the culture. So what we do, I'm actually pretty excited about it, is, oftentimes when you interview for me, your first person you meet, or an interview for any position on my team, first person you meet is me, and we go to coffee. And when we go grab a coffee, guess what? We're out of creamer. Oh, and I love creamer. Shoot, what do we do? And I sit back and I watch. I just watch to see what the candidate does. Do they panic? Do they fold? Do they act complacent? Because this will tend to be these will be the behaviors they have when they're working with a really senior leader in the organization, someone that maybe they're trying to impress. And so I want to find someone who's calm, cool, and collected, who can ask some questions and maybe help brainstorm and ideate and kind of lead there. We then spend the rest of the day working through an entire problem. So rather than these pre-canned set of questions, which I always kind of feel it turns down to opinion. What we do is, someone will come in and we ask them to solve a design challenge. We then have product and engineering come in and challenge that design result to see how the person handles pushback. We then ask them to go during lunch and validate their idea with people having food in the cafeteria. This allows us to observe how likely are they to get out of their desk and actually gather feedback and incorporate that feedback into the change. They then meet with a member of the design team to figure out how they might leverage existing design patterns, so we can figure out how likely are they to be consistent. And finally, we ask them to present their solution at the end of the day to the design org. And it's really to see how can they contribute and present as a member of the team. So that's kind of like when it comes to recruiting and hiring, what we do, that I do. I bifurcate my team actually into two different portfolios. And the first is more of an operational side. And that means they're focusing on creating consistency around our hiring processes, our onboarding processes, our leveraging process, plus they're managing a design system, which is a whole separate talk we can have about the layers that go in a design system. It's not a bunch of stencils and kits. It's much more elaborate than that. And then the other side of my team, what we're doing for employees, they're actually on products, and we've ditched the prefixes. So we've ditched UX designer, CX designer, IA designer, user researcher. We just have designer. And I think of those in terms of skills and capabilities, because I think someone can be a user researcher and a UX designer at the same time. And as we get to smaller pods of teams, having them as skills and not capabilities allows us to move faster. And so that tends to be how we function within those teams. Lastly, in terms of the culture within my organization, is leadership. Because I actually expect and empower individual team members to own their own projects and outcomes. I remove that from my leaders by shifting them to what I call the 25-10 rule. So leaders historically have end of the year performance rewards and mechanisms around the output of their team. I don't give a damn about that. Just plain and simple. I don't care how well members of their team are producing explicitly. What I care is our leaders on my team. So the 25-10 says that 25% of the members of that person's team should be promoted year after year. Now, promotion can be within the team, within the company, or within the industry. And the reason I do that is I really want my design leaders laser focusing on career growth and developing talent, not on is that talent producing great work. Producing great work will come as a result of focusing on their career, but if they focus on that work, they're going to over intrude. So that's why we do that. And then the 10% is what I call the no asshole rule. They can't have more than 10% of the team leave unexplained, basically because they don't want to work for them. Also, what we've done to shift up this to make it more effective is we've shifted the ratio. So in most organizations, every design leader, they'll have 6 reports. We've shifted to a 20-to-1 and even a 40-to-1 ratio in some cases. And this really removes that design leader's ability to influence the direction of a product. So that tends to be where we're at.
That sounds like a more constructive way of handling the process.
Yeah.
When it comes to success, what would you say is your most successful digital initiative?
I mean, the most successful digital initiative. I mean, I've had a lot of different ones that I'm proud of over the years. Some have been successful in terms of the eyes of the public. Some have been successful in terms of inspiration. So, at Amazon, I want folks on this call to think about this. In 2010, when I joined Amazon, 90% of the products sold on Amazon were for sale by Amazon, meaning Amazon went out, they had buyers that would go buy the products, they'd list it on the site and sell, just like you see at any other retailer. And so I was brought in with this notion of they wanted to allow other people to sell on Amazon. Now, I want you to imagine going to your favorite grocery store, your favorite retail store, go to any store in your mind that you can think of, and imagine there was a bunch of vendors selling at that store. That's what they wanted to do. And those people needed to compete simultaneously with all the data and power behind Amazon. And so we created the strategy for that. And actually, I think it's like almost 95% of all products sold on Amazon today are by third-party sellers. And so, I'm super excited about that. Like, I love thinking about two sides of a marketplace and helping the little guy get big. So that was a success there. At SAP, my team and I took this amazing design system that we had called Fiori and evolved it to what's called Fiori 2. Fiori 2 impacts 125,000 screens. I want you to think about a design system that has to take into account 125,000 screens. That's more screens than any product in the world. It won a red dot. It was a success. But the real cool thing about it wasn't the Fiori. It was the realization that companies like SAP, companies like Oracle, Microsoft, Salesforce, all these big powerhouses, that their UI, and they have these great design teams, that the reason they fail is not because the company, but because they require third-party integrators to put that in place. Those third-party integrators don't have design teams. And so they just kind of throw, the kitchen in with the sink and everything. And it turns out looking like crap. And so we created a whole new business unit called User Experience as a Service. And we use artificial intelligence, which I think is pretty cool, where you could actually, you could take a business owner, take an Excel spreadsheet, upload it to this tool we call Build. And because we had a well-formed design system, it would actually shoot out compliant, well-functioning UI following the Fiori guidelines. And so we were able to automate user experience. So I thought that was pretty cool. Other cool things I got to do successful while at SAP was to rethink the experience of sporting events. So I designed the fan experience for Super Bowl 50 and the digital fan experience for some of the local sports teams in the Bay Area in the US, where it started with these little initiatives of coming in to say, hey, we want to take digital tickets. And we were able to, in asking, the root cause analysis, 5 whys, like, why do you want digital tickets, to come to the conclusion that they were really trying to find who they should target from a sales perspective. And we said, that's kind of BS because you have these ushers at every aisle. Why not make them better salespeople? And them saying it's not possible. And so what we came up with very quickly was this story that used wayfinding. As you walked in and would scan your ticket, it therefore knew who you were because it scanned your ticket. So it could follow you based on the beacon on your phone that everyone has. So it knew where you're at in the stadium. It knew where you're supposed to sit. So it could determine if you were in your seat or not. With facial recognition across the stadium, it could actually look at your face to determine your sentiment. Are you happy or you're sad? And then because you've been using all this, it could tie in, and it tied in your buying behaviors at the register to shoot all that information to that usher to say, hey, Mike Brown's having a horrible time. He's left his seat 3 times. He looks upset. Go bring him a hot dog because he likes hot dogs. So I think that was a pretty big success. And then quite frankly, from a business perspective, was what we did with Dick's Sporting Goods. It was a company that had tons of vendors, was very driven by traditional retail and metrics, merchandising, like, do we have the right products? Do we have the right price? Are we in the right locations? And shifting them to be a much more agile product-based outcome culture, as I mentioned, and they've had 2 to 3 quarters of record success. So, I think all of these are great stories. I honestly can't take credit for any of it. I've just been at the right place at the right time, and I've worked with amazing people. So
I was hoping that you'd mention Intuit because when I first read Lean Startup, I remember Intuit came up as one of the studies in there. So the whole evening I was waiting for some info on that, but of context.
So we can definitely talk about that. I mean, if you want to talk about Lean Startup, that's great. So Eric Ries's book, Lean Startup, is an amazing book. Chapter 10 talks about Eastman Kodak. And that was my work at Eastman Kodak. And then while at Intuit, we were bringing that in. Intuit goes way beyond rapid experimentation in terms of understanding what customer needs need to be. Intuit, in addition to having Design for Delight, D for D, folks on this call, make sure you go look at a D for D with Susan Pelican, Joseph Sullivan, and Karen Hansen did with D for D is just amazing. They actually, Scott had this thing called Follow Me Homes as a way to understand customer needs. And it's part of Lean Startup, but it's really part of Lean understanding. So oftentimes we can get in this paralysis of user. And by the way, I started off in user research, but we get in this paralysis of looking at the data, doing the studies, doing the focus groups, yada, 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 ultimately never to deliver anything that people want. So what Scott did, and actually we did it at Dick's recently as well, is he told people they had to get out of their desk and they had to follow customers home to their office to see how they work. They had to see what they do and what they do differently, right? And it was that ability to observe the world from the user's perspective that they actually were able to pivot this tool that had been for personal finance management to actually pivot to say, well, people are using it professionally. We should make QuickBooks. And so, by getting out off your desk, getting out there and rapidly see things, you find these opportunities in the world. And I think that, in addition to the rapid experimentation, like 48 hours, get an idea, validate it, are what led to Intuit's success and countless others.
One of the things that we spoke about in our earlier talks was the effects of COVID on many companies. There's been a lot of people that have been laid off, companies looking at reduced workforces. What do you think companies should be focusing on now and into the future to minimize this kind of risk on people?
Well, time has passed since our initial conversation. And quite frankly, the one thing that I am seeing the companies who are thriving, and let's talk about like companies like Mural, who just raised 100 million, companies like Toast that just got a $3 billion valuation. And I can go through countless others. I mean, there are companies during COVID who have grown 10 to 40x without effort. And what they did differently is they ditched their long-term planning. They didn't go into analysis paralysis, right, to say, we need to come up with a solution that's going to last forever. They just said, how do we solve for today? Okay, COVID hit, people can't go to work. What do we do today? And what they did, which was really smart, really on both of them and a few others, is they doubled down, tripled down on their resources. So while a lot of companies got afraid and fearful, people aren't buying as much. How do we handle this? What do they do? What do we do? Let's reduce our workforce. These companies actually went out and started to increase their workforce to figure out how do they gain a bigger market share, right? So, and what I've seen is companies who embraced COVID early on as an opportunity, once in a lifetime opportunity, and also took it as this idea, and this is also key, took it as an idea of everything that we create during COVID, we're going to ditch. As soon as COVID's gone, as soon as people are back to work, we're going to go back to the way of work. This is just during COVID. Those are the ones who thrived. And quite frankly, it's that same story we've seen with digital transformation. When companies get into analysis paralysis, they overthink things, they never execute. And because of the lack of execution, they're always behind the 8 ball and they never execute at full potential. So as it comes to COVID, that's been my analysis, is the companies that executed without fear, double down, triple down, are the ones who thrived. And the ones who got into that analysis paralysis or were waiting for it to be over, or were just trying to wait the storm out, are the ones that had to let people go. So, there's a certain type of executive presence that those companies all had, very aggressive, very eager, very A-type personality CEOs. And so quite frankly, for those looking to work for someone, I would look for that type of executive.
You also mentioned before that you had many discussions with designers internationally. I think you said a couple of hundred designers. Throughout those discussions, what did you notice that, what kind of views came across, or what was the different perspectives that you noticed?
Yeah, so that's definitely a great question. So let's take a step back. So I used to go to, just like here, I used to go to many conferences, and I use them as a way to kind of keep track with people. And as COVID set in, and maybe even a little bit before COVID, I stopped traveling. And so I started something new where I would reach out to a certain number of designers every day and try to take 4 phone calls 6 to 7 days a week. That resulted in over 500, I think it's like 528, I stopped counting, but it's like 528 30-minute phone calls with creatives from China to California, in Israel to India, the C-suites to the slums, I mean, all over the board. And there were certain trends that popped out immediately. So in terms of maturity, if you remember back to we said about like the UI, UX, CX, BX, or SD, certain regions of the world had definitely had expectations more leaning towards those. So in Europe, most of the European designers were already kind of in the service design, brand experience mindset. They had shifted out from like the roles and responsibilities as designing elements to what is the workflow, and meaning that they were applying design thinking to spaces outside of product, which was great. When I looked at like the Middle East and Asia, specifically the Eastern regions of Asia, they were applying CX. They were looking at like, what is the customer experience with boarding a train? What's the customer experience when interacting with government? So in terms of expectations, were really around CX. In the US, it still was very focused and still is very focused on UX design, with design thinking bleeding in. However, there is this new shift that we're seeing, especially in terms of like job titles and expectations in the US, where they're moving more towards CX. And then finally, as I looked across like the BRIC regions in Mexico and Latin America, designers still had the expectations of purely just driving UI design, right? Now, as I would speak to executives, they always had higher expectations, but when it got to the leadership roles, designers were still being held to those constraints. And so what we saw, and what I continuously saw, was amazing UX designers from, let's just say, Mexico. You wouldn't find them in Mexico. They had moved to Europe or the Middle East, where they could actually apply their skill sets. You would see great designers from India moving to the US, where they could be great UX designers. And what's happening is those regions were being filled with designers from kind of secondary tiers. So Mexico was being filled with like Argentina, Costa Rica, etc. And so we saw that. Holistically across the board, everyone seems to know and understand the concept of design thinking and what goes into it and how do we do it. But I struggled to find anyone that could actually talk to me about how they applied it. I would constantly hear this notion of how do I get my stakeholders to, actually take customer needs in, to explore, to understand, to be curious, right? That's kind of the premises of design thinking. But at the same time, they were asking me for answers rather than applying design thinking towards their own problem. As soon as I would sit and ask them, well, who are your customers? What are their needs? What are their thoughts? What do they go through? And actually walk them through design thinking on how do they apply design thinking for their specific space and expectations, because you can only move someone up one notch. They struggled. And it was like, oh my God, like it was uncomfortable. Like all the fears that they talked about their stakeholders having applying a proper design process, they were having applying the process for their own problem. So that was kind of interesting. Designers had all kind of had this, there had always been the sense that design had finally made it. We had a seat at the table. I've still struggled to find a place where a designer reports to a Fortune 500 CEO or sits on a Fortune 500 board. So I think we're getting there, but we're not there yet. As I spoke to folks and looked at roles and responsibilities, a lot of job descriptions around CX were opening, that 80% of the job descriptions were solely within the UX space. Like you read it and you're like, yep, this is a UX designer. However, what I found is that 90% of the time, those roles were getting filled by someone in customer service, someone in operations, or someone in the business. So what that means is we as designers are still struggling to explain why we should be running these things that we should be running, like CX, which kind of lastly was what I call the teenager driving problem, is that, when I would speak to designers about what do you expect to happen when you have a seat at the table, it felt like I was talking to my son about getting his driver's license, right? When I talk to my son about getting his driver's license, it's, it means I can go out and do whatever I want. I'm going to get some really fast car. I'm going to have freedom. like it's all about these owners, this autonomy and whatever it might be. But his mother and I think about it completely differently. When my son gets a car, it means he's going to have responsibilities like paying his own insurance. He's going to be taking his brother and sister places, and he's probably not going to have a fast car. He's going to have a safe vehicle, right? And so as you think about that mindset, that's kind of how the business thinks about design. And that's why we're struggling to take over CX, as I've talked about the globe. It's because we think what it means to drive CX or creativity is, oh, we're going to go out and identify new problems, and we're going to explore new opportunities, and we're going to be innovative and creative. It's like my son talking about the freedom. The business thinks about it differently. And until we cross that chasm, it's going to be a problem. They think about it as, oh, you are going to be financially responsible. You're going to deliver value based on what we spend. There's a return on investment. You're going to reduce operational costs. You're going to increase loyalty. You're not going to, you're not going to do a year-long study because that costs money and reduces time to market. So, that's been my observation with all these phone calls. Besides, like, we have a super tight-knit community. When I talk to friends in other spaces like operations, engineering, logistics, they're amazed that I could find this many people to have conversations with. And I think we as designers just feel disconnected and want to be closer connected.
Well, maybe part of the reason why you don't find a lot of designers on dealing with Fortune 500 companies is maybe they're the ones running it. Have you found that at all?
No. No. And so I know you have a question later, but this really goes to the neurodiversity topic. And I'll just quickly go onto that and come back to it. Neurodiversity being autism, ADD, dyslexia, blindness, deaf, empath, whatever. Basically, you are different from everyone else, but no one can determine that. The largest population of people with neurodiversity exists in the creative space. Surprise, surprise. And quite frankly, nearly all of the executives that we look for and admire have it as well. Think about like Steve Jobs, right? They have some form of neurodiversity. However, as companies move up the ladder in terms of to become an enterprise, a big company, oftentimes it shifts to a place of stability and control and predictability. And this isn't the strong suit for someone with neurodiversity. And quite frankly, we still struggle to figure out how to let people with neurodiversity lead. So think about Steve Jobs, how he was booted from his own company and brought back just to save it, but still just driving innovation, right? And so, yeah, I think enterprise companies were founded by someone with this, but we don't see them necessarily leading them, unfortunately, yet.
I'll have to do the research on that, so I can't confirm. For a lot of our members, there's a lot of people that are switching careers, some of them moving from UI to UX or CX. What kind of advice would you give anyone trying to make any kind of move?
While I hate portfolios, I just want to kind of get that out there. Like, I think portfolios are the worst thing, and I want to put an explicitive in there, but I won't. They're the worst thing to our business. They're the worst thing to our profession, because a portfolio demonstrates a unique ability to solve problems. But whenever you're working in a design team or a UX team or a CX team, you don't want someone coming in uniquely solving problems. You want someone that'll come in and work within your own system. So, that's the first problem with design, portfolios. But unfortunately, today, portfolios are required to play the game. So, the advice I'd give everyone on this call is the same advice I gave a friend who's actually been really successful recently. And it's the following. You're going to create a portfolio, but do it on Dribbble, right? And what you want to do is at least once every other week, if not every week, you're going to go in and you're going to find someone else's work that you think looks great. And you're going to replicate it with your own twist, but you're going to demonstrate the ability to do that, whether it be a motion graphic, a visual design, whatever. Don't copy it. Just replicate the styles to demonstrate your ability to produce those various styles across, multiple user experiences, videos, whatever, and put that up there, right? You're going to need a portfolio that demonstrates an ability to do the job. I hate, I don't care about someone solving a unique problem because it doesn't help me, but I want to see, can they actually design? Do they know how to do design? Do they know how to look at details? And so number one, get it up on Dribbble, because Dribbble also will subconsciously reinforce the credibility of that portfolio because it's open to the public. So that's why I say every other week, replicate with your own twists someone's work. Number two, as you're getting into this space, is find someone who's credible already in the space to make them your mentor or coach so that you can eventually leverage them to make introductions to the right opportunities. Oftentimes, it's through an academic organization that you get placed in a great company, right? So you've gone to Stanford, MIT, SCAD, or HPI, or wherever, right? Those designers are getting picked up with jobs, and IDF might get you placed, which would be great. But even better than that is to find someone and ask them, someone who you would want to eventually be your boss, and ask them if they'll coach you and if they'll mentor you on how to get your portfolio, your resume, any part of the job right. I have 3 or 4 people who do this with me. And what's happened is I introduced them to hiring managers who are friends of mine where they might be a good fit. And they automatically skip past the line of going through the recruiter and the HR person to go to the very top of the list of that hiring manager. Right? And because I'm advising them, I feel sort of connected to helping them succeed. So find the right mentor or coach. Finally, third piece of advice, if you're looking to switch, is how you show up and the personality you bring, right? A lot of designers come in with the artist mentality, right? Which is a very introverted model. Michelangelo painted by himself. We know that, right? So you come in introverted. However, you're going to be working on a team, and the job of UX and CX is not to draw pixels, it's to facilitate conversations. And so you need to come in demonstrating a level of confidence, curiosity, and an ability to tell a story, right? You need to be able to step into a room and ask anyone in the room their ideas, even if it feels like you're challenging them, but really do it in a positive way. You really want to dive in deeper to really understand what people mean, not just assume your own thoughts. And then you want to be able to play it back to them in a way that makes them go, wow, that's even better than I thought. So that's what I would tell anyone looking to make the switch.
It's a bit of a difficult one when a lot of the mentors that most people want are the people that are the most busy. So
well, that's the problem is when folks start thinking about mentors, they think about like Don Norman, like Chris Doe. Like, don't be silly. Don't be silly. Like, one piece of advice I can give you also is for the last 24 years, every year I've had a new mentor or coach. I've never had the same mentor or coach every year. So plan on getting a new coach, a new mentor every year. Find the person you want to work for, the manager you want to work for, and ask them, just that next person up. And you're not asking them a big deal. Like if that's what's holding you back from asking, then you're never going to break into this space because you're going to have to like get over those insecurities.
when it comes to career changes, do you have a single piece of advice you think would be appropriate?
Well, so as we just kind of covered, in order, become a people person. Even if you're an introvert, figure it out, learn it. It's almost like become a salesperson. I think I had that as an advantage growing up in a sales family. I just naturally knew how to do that. And that's been a major reason of my success, is just learn how to talk and engage people. Number one, first and foremost, like you will be more successful with that versus your ability to draw or anything. Secondly, is have a bias for action. Business thinks of designers as slow, just needy, emotional. Be always the person in the room shooting out ideas that you can take forward. They're not huge, but they can be actionable. Always be curious. And then quite frankly, so I teach at multiple universities. And the one thing that I tell my students always, as I just hinted here, is don't worry about creating your own style yet. You have your entire career, 5, 10, 20, whatever, how many ever years it's going to be, to create your own style. Right now, just demonstrate an ability to do the job, right? And so oftentimes folks, when they're trying to switch into UX, try to come in like creating these portfolios of solving things uniquely and differently. No one cares. Just show that, and that's why I was saying, like, go onto Dribbble, find a piece of work and replicate it. Just show that you know how to use the tools and you can use them effectively and efficiently. Then when you're in your career, you can start to develop your own style. You can start to explore, you can start to demonstrate. Don't start there.
This is one of the more interesting ones as well. Your nickname is the farmer. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So so the farmer. I grew up in a family of farmers. I dream and aspire to have an olive orchard. I love farming. When my grandfather and my grandmother moved to America from the Azores, it's an island in the middle of the Atlantic, to what is called Sunnyvale, the heart of the Bay Area, it was all farmland, and we started farming. And you know, the city came and took the property from my grandfather, and it's now the Silicon Valley, where it's all concrete and technology and IT and everything that everyone on this call loves. And I got to do and go through my career with, but it was starting with farming. And so I am called the farmer, not just because of that, not because I wore cowboy boots and it's sponsored by a farming brand. I'm called the farmer because I have gone around numerous times giving a talk on how digital transformation and design are as simple as farming, and yet we overcomplicate the hell out of everything. And so everyone is something different, right? And oftentimes, like I'll turn to folks even on this call to say, like, think about design thinking. How many different ways have you seen it applied? Service design, how many different models have you seen for all this crap, right? But isn't it as simple as just like understanding someone's pain and how do we meet that? And so I always draw the metaphor of the simplicity of farming to the simplicity of innovation and technology and design. So that's why I got called the farmer.
You've already mentioned how you can how design and farming is quite similar. When we think of design over the next 5 to 10 years, can you tell us what you see as far as evolution when it comes to technology and society as well?
So I think, if I'm right, maybe I'm right, I've been right about a couple things. We are finally leaving the egocentric state of products. And what I mean by that is this, when we create products, we tend to create them in this vacuum, thinking that our product exists in isolation, that the user comes to us, we solve everything and they go away. And the reality is we're really like that Heinz ketchup. There was probably steak, there was a table, there was a maitre d', there was a bunch of stuff going on, and we were part of that problem. And so I think we're starting to enter into the world of what I consider like ecosystem design and partnership, to say that my company, my brand, my solution doesn't solve everything for the user, but solves something in that story for the user. And how do I always show up my best? And I think we're getting there because as we're looking at, number one, data sets, companies are getting really good about starting to bring in all these disparate data silos within their own organization. It's been one of the biggest barriers so far, is because, you know, I can think of an employer that I was with recently that they couldn't actually give an accurate price and an accurate time because it was across 3 different data silos. And so companies are starting to bring these into what's called data lakes. And then they're also starting to supplement those data lakes with rivers from external sources, be it partner sources, social media, news, finance, etc. And they're leveraging both qualitative and quantitative data. So the amount of data coming together for a single inspection is huge, which allows me to think about the ecosystem differently, number one. Number two, AI is starting to allow us to take this data and manipulate it and interpret it in really interesting ways, right? We're actually able to combine qualitative triggers and quantitative triggers to understand human needs and behaviors. And because all of that, I think when we think about this ecosystem, as we think about products, maybe 5, 10 years down the road, we're actually going to get more towards the Norman door example, right? I think right now folks are so intrinsically thinking about the details of the door and the mechanism, the handle, look and feel, that the reality is no one even cares about the door. You just want to know if you can go in and out. So when we get to about maybe 5-10 years from now, what we're going to see is we're going to shift back to UX really empowering human to human relationships as the differentiator, and not creating new technology and new products, but really how do we help people connect better.
Thank you so much for sharing all your insights with us this evening. I think we have gone a bit over time, but I really enjoyed listening to you. I think everybody can agree as well. So if there are any, maybe we can move to the audience and see if there's any questions that you guys would like to ask. You can either unmute or type in our chat.
Hi there.
Hi.
So I know you spoke a lot about the portfolio and what to do to change careers. Or change from like UI to UX. I'm coming from a science background, chemistry major, to now a completely different field. Where would my starting point be? Like, where can you go to rack up experience that most employers need when you have nothing behind you?
As mentioned earlier, I think it's really effing simple. It's like farming. It's so darn simple that you're looking for a complex answer to it. You go onto Dribble and you just literally replicate the work. I kid you not. It is that simple. Because an employer here's what's going to happen. On the employer side, they're going to simply look to say, can this person do the job? Can they do the job? That's what they're going to answer. But you have to get past that HR block, right? The HR team is going to evaluate your resume. Do you have the same level of experience? Well, this person has 5-10 years from a design institution. This person's a chemistry department. I don't know. So skip it. It's simple. Skip it. Get yourself a coach who's well connected at the level of the manager you want to report to, and ask them to review the work you have on Dribble. Right? There's a thing called, I think it's called the ADP list, where there's over like 4,000 design managers out there right now saying that they will review your portfolio, they will review your resume, they will coach you for free. I think it's adplist.org or something. It's like, I think it's like a design person list or something like that. You can find it. But it's the same thing I told Johnny. And by the way, I won't give out his last name, but Johnny was in India, living in the slums of India. And I gave him the same advice I gave you. He's like, how do I get out of here? Everyone else has gone to IIT Mumbai. They've done all these things. I said, Johnny, every day, every 2 weeks, I want you to go on and make a new video of an interaction pattern that you like and just change it up for what you like and do that. In 3 months, Johnny had a job at Microsoft. A year later, he kept it going. A year later, he's now like a senior designer at Google. From the slums of senior designer in 2.5 years, and transitioning from India to the US. I mean, it's as simple as that. It really isn't overcomplicated, but we try to overcomplicate and think these barriers exist. You got to get past HR and you got to be able to demonstrate an ability. That's it.
Okay.
Your chemistry background will come in when you're actually on the job. And that's that confidence you'll be able to provide. You'll be able to say, hey, you know what? If I think back to my chemistry days, here's how things play out. Or we looked at chemistry this way. What if we looked at this problem with the same way? Because see, when you're in the actual job, your job is to facilitate a conversation. When you're in UX, your job is to facilitate the conversation between the product and the engineering teams. And so you can apply, those chemistry scientific methods as a way to rethink a problem. And that's facilitation. So you'll be able to bring it back in, but you got to demonstrate the portfolio. You got to get the mentor to get past HR. And then all that's going to come back in folds.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's
cool.
Really
and it's
useful.
Easy. Yeah.
Oh, we have another question coming.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
When do you think UX will reach into, like, I don't know how to say it, but more, you look at like, let's say a jet plane and how the inside of the plane would be laid out. It's pretty intense, So how do you think user experience could flow over into things like Exactly.
The military, especially the US military, was one of the first investors in UX. Back in the 1980s, 70s and 80s, as they were designing the cockpits that you talk about, like how do you ensure, I mean, but you have to think about the medium, right? The medium then was analog devices and touching devices, but it was all about user experience. But they were designing it back then. Designers now are starting to think about voice-based experiences, right? It's just the medium has shifted, just like a painter goes from pastels to watercolors, whatever, the medium has shifted. The military has been doing it. Those type of interfaces that you're talking about are what I call secondary interfaces. And the way to think about them is any secondary interface is like the dashboard on your car. So imagine if you were driving, staring at your dashboard, and that's what you focused on as your primary focus, you'd probably crash and die, and you wouldn't be here to ask me that question. But it provides you just enough information at your secondary peripheral that allows you to have a more enhanced primary experience, i.e. driving. The same goes with the cockpit of a SpaceX plane and vice versa, right? They're secondary in nature. SpaceX, I mean, that was a beautiful, I mean, they have what, one big touch screen in there that they flew with, and it was great. I don't know, but those have been around for a year. In terms of military application, the military, especially in the state, well, actually internationally, is one of the biggest spenders on UX and CX.
We have another question in the chat here from Bauer. I think I could pronounce it correctly. Are the levels of maturity for digitalization published anywhere? Do we have any URLs for that?
I can get you a picture of that graph. I think actually, yes. So if you go to my LinkedIn, if you guys aren't connected to me on LinkedIn, then shame on you. Just kidding. Make sure you're connected to me on LinkedIn. If you go to my documents, I post a lot of this content on there. You'll see the levels there. It's actually called levels of digital transformation.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll add those links as well, links directly to your profile in the resources that we'll be sending after this session.
Okay.
Okay, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us. This was very enlightening. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
In conclusion, we'd like to say thank you to everybody who was taking the time out of their busy schedules to attend this session this evening. And a special thank you to our speaker, Michael Brown, for sharing all his insights with us and his experiences over the last 20 years, as well as everybody who's helped to make this evening happen. For example, having our cool little fireside chat background, our animations and sound, as well as the rest of the production from our graphic designer David, sound design Sheldon, as well as animation from Heath. We also are saying goodbye to Melissa, who's been our Johannesburg IDF co-lead. She'll be moving to Amsterdam, and we'd just like to say thank you to Melissa for everything that she's done so far. Was done for us and helped us with in helping IDF Johannesburg to be a success. As far as if anybody is interested in joining to be a co-lead for IDF, please feel free to reach out to me, reach out to us on any of our current social media platforms, either LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. When it comes to jobs, we do have some clients who have contacted us looking for design researchers. We have one that's specifically for Francophone in a Francophone coordinator of women building power for energy and climate justice, and another one as a Pan-African research coordinator. For the Francophone role that is specific to the country, whereas the Pan-African research coordinator can be remote and based anywhere in Africa. Resources will also be shared at the end of the session. And please remember that if you're looking to learn more about design, go to the interaction, it's interaction-design.org, and you can find all sorts of courses there, from user experience design, design thinking, information visualization, to name a few. We also have some templates from Michael Brown. Thank you for that. He's shared the opportunity canvas with us, and there's a few other links which will also be shared at the end of the session. So thank you, everybody, and good night.